We'll introduce the paper BA4 by briefly talking about the full name and title of the paper and then thinking about what that means before we then move into the syllabus areas and their weightings, where we'll talk about each aspect of the syllabus in a little bit more detail. So this paper looks at the fundamentals of ethics, corporate governance and business law. And the reason it does this is because increasingly in the modern business world, we are being asked to run our businesses for the benefit of all of our stakeholders. So that will include our customers, our employees, our suppliers, and perhaps even the people that live in and around the place in which we do work. So because of this, we're under an increasing obligation to act with the highest ethical standards. And we'll need to understand and appreciate that ethics means more than just complying with the CIMA code of ethics. So we need to know more than just what confidentiality, integrity, and objectivity means. It means having to comply with something called corporate governance. So corporate governance refers to the way in which organisations are run and operated. So we'll need to ensure that when we run our businesses and when we as accountants advise people on how to run the businesses that employ us, we're able to advise the business owners and the business managers on the highest standards of best practice. Finally, as part of ethical compliance and as part of corporate governance, of course, we're going to have to operate our organisations legally. So therefore, we're going to require an understanding of the legal and administrative frameworks that underpin our commercial activities. So within this, we're going to have an appreciation of the basics of areas of law such as contract, making sure that we're setting up robust contracts with our suppliers and our customers, employment law, to make sure that we're fairly treating our employees, and of course making sure that we administer and run our business in a manner that's legally compliant too. Hello and welcome to your paper introduction for the paper BA4, and BA4 covers the topics of ethics, corporate governance, control and law. And as we can see, it breaks down to very specific syllabus areas. So our first syllabus area here introduces us to the topic of business ethics, and we can see it's a pretty big topic worth just under 1/3 of the exam. And in this particular area here, we're going to introduce you to what the concept of ethics is and why ethics is especially important to accountants. And then we'll see how the accounting industry and how CIMA itself regulates the affairs of its members. We'll also pick up within here some advice on how to identify and how to deal with ethical conflict. And that moves us on to the next section of the syllabus, where we start to look at corporate governance and control, but also a little bit about corporate social responsibility as well. We can see here this is by far and away the largest part of the syllabus. It's going to account for around about 35 or so questions in the exam, covering the topics of corporate governance. So we'll need to explain what corporate governance is. So we'll talk about the fact it's something to do with the way that organisations are run and controlled and directed. And we'll see that largely it's about making sure that you've got good people in control of your organisation and that they are subject to sufficient levels of oversight. So in other words, how do I get a good, strong board of directors, and how do I make sure I have control over the way that board of directors runs the business on a daily basis? When we talk about controls here, we can talk specifically about auditing. So we can talk about the differences between internal auditing and external auditing and how those two spheres overlap, but crucially how they differ from each other. And then we'll look at the concept of corporate social responsibility, and we'll see that CSR is something that organisations can choose to get involved in, or they can choose not to get involved in. But we'll see most businesses are coming around to the view that corporate social responsibility is probably a positive thing for them to invest their time and monies in. The syllabus then takes really a bit of a huge break, and it moves into really the legal aspect. So as we can see here, the last two aspects, worth a total of 1/4 of the exam, are actually engaged in law. And here's where things become a little bit tricky from our perspective, because it's actually relatively quick to explain the concepts of ethics, ethical conflict and corporate governance, etc. Whereas when we're teaching law, these are trickier and more technical concepts. So they're actually proportionately going to take longer to explain and longer to teach. So you're going to find when you're studying, you're going to get through parts A and B of the syllabus quite quickly. So you're going to get through the first sort of 7 or 8 chapters of the notes and the first couple of topics online quite quickly. Then it'll feel like you're getting bogged down a little bit in the law. So we start to go through part C and part D. But just bear in mind that the vast majority of questions will come from those parts A and B of the syllabus. So when we get into the law part of the syllabus, what are we looking at? Well, first of all, we need to understand the concept of the legal system, and in particular here, there's an emphasis on contract law and on employment law. So we're going to find out how you form a contract, what goes into a contract, what are the terms of the contract, and then what are some of the problems that emerge with the formation and the operation of contracts. Then we'll look at employment law, and employment law is really just a very specific area of contract law, because all employment relationships are going to be regulated by a contract. So whether that be a contract that you've agreed in writing, or whether or not that be a contract that's been kind of agreed verbally, and as we'll see, is really informed by terms that are implied from external sources, such as case law or such as legislation. We then finally move into company administration, and we can see here it's only 10% of the syllabus. This used to be a much larger area under the previous version of this paper. So this used to be a paper called C5, and there was a lot more company administration and company law in here, but a lot of that has been taken out. So now we're going to see a relatively short part of the syllabus, and in actual fact it won't take too long for you to study this remaining 10%. So you'll see, for example, what are the different types of organisation you can use to trade. So do I need a company, or could I use a partnership or a sole tradership? How do I form a company? And then what are some of the kind of administrative and bureaucratic processes you need to think of if you go about forming a company?